Stepping up to the couch, it's Brian, who led the league last season in cracked screens. But with his new athletic case, it looks like that won't be the case. Touchdown, Brian!
So the Portland Trailblazers just lost to the Golden State Warriors, and all I have to say about that is, yeah, no shit. I mean, what did we all expect? It's the fucking Warriors. I will say I expected this series to be a little closer than it was, but if the result is still an L, I mean, what does it really matter? This tweet by Daryl Morey was really stupid. If you lost, you lost. There ain't no bragging about an L. Also, fuck Daryl Morey. I don't look anything like him. Shut up. So where do the Portland Trailblazers go from here? What are the issues with the roster? How do they go about fixing the issues with this roster? And can these potential solutions really make this team a contender? I would probably say no, but let's just jump into it.
Rebound, save, absolutely incredibly underway with the acrobatic alley-oop.
Let's look at this Portland Trailblazers roster outside of Dame and CJ, though we will talk about them in a little bit. I want to look at the other players on the roster because I think it's pretty clear that Dame and CJ are not to blame for the Portland Trailblazers losing this series. Some of you may disagree with that, but we'll talk about that in a second. The starting lineup of the Blazers versus the Warriors was Dame and CJ, and then Mo Harkless, Al-Farouq Aminu, and Enes Kanter. Now, weirdly enough, and this wasn't something that I was expecting going into the playoffs, I didn't actually have that big of a problem with Enes Kanter as the starting center. Obviously, he won't be the starter when Jusuf Nurkic comes back, but after Nurkic went down and I heard that Enes Kanter was going to be their starting center, I thought the Blazers were fucked. Kanter is one of, if not the worst defensive centers in the league, and offensively, he's a good post player and finisher, but he really can't stretch the floor, not that Nurkic can, but versus the Warriors and in the playoffs in general, I think he has been a plus. His defense has looked the worst that it has in the playoffs versus the Warriors, but I also think, again, no shit. And because of that, he played a lot less minutes versus the Warriors, but for the playoffs overall, he's averaged 12 points, 10 rebounds, 3.5 of those boards being offensive, and he did this shooting 51%, and again, he's been at least acceptable on defense, not blatantly terrible. So, him back on the bench with Nurkic starting should be perfectly fine in my opinion. He hasn't really been the problem in their starting lineup. The biggest problems have been Al-Farouq Aminu and Mo Harkless. Mostly Aminu. With these two, it's really about the lack of shooting. These guys have always been seemingly competent shooters, but it's always been shaky. You know those guys in the NBA that shoot well from three and you're like, those guys are good shooters, but are they really though? Like Jay Crowder, who shot 40% from three, but then it turned out he was actually no better than below average from three. There are a lot of examples of that, and Harkless and Aminu are perfect examples of that. Harkless, for example, last year shot 2 threes a game and shot 41% from three. This year he shot 2 a game and shot 27%. He's a good defender, good athlete, and a fairly smart offensive player, cutting at the right times, knowing where to be at the right time, but that can only take you so far. But he was actually decent versus the Golden State Warriors in this series. He actually shot 40% from three versus the Warriors, at least in the first 3 games, because I wrote this before Game 4 was over. But he did that taking a very small amount of attempts, which means he was really only taking the open threes, which the Warriors were giving him. If he is only able to take open shots, even being a 40% three-point shooter, he's really not that good of a shooter. Even if you shoot well taking wide open three-pointers, the fact that you can't hit one with a little bit of a contest hurts the spacing. Now for Aminu, he was not good at all versus the Warriors. He's shooting 28% from three on less attempts than Harkless, and he's shooting 38% overall. But even without the stats, from watching the Portland Trailblazers versus the Warriors, and specifically Damian Lillard, you can see how much the Warriors didn't give a shit about Mo Harkless and Al-Farouq Aminu. These guys being poor shooters means that you can leave them open, and if they make it, you live with the result. And then when they put out a lineup with Seth Curry and Rodney Hood on the court, suddenly Dame and CJ were scoring a lot easier than normal. Basically, I'm saying all of this to introduce you to a revolutionary new concept. You may have heard of it. It's this thing in the NBA that is called spacing. Putting out a lineup with Kanter, Aminu, and Evan Turner is not going to work in 2019. So basically, the problem with this roster is outside of CJ and Dame, nobody can shoot the damn ball. Now, that's not entirely an excuse for Dame's underperformance, because ironically, the Golden State Warriors outside of Curry and Clay have very poor spacing. Other than Quinn Cook and Jonas Jerebko, who aren't even really that good at shooting, and maybe Andre Iguodala, this team is filled with poor shooters. Curry and Clay are just so damn good at shooting that it doesn't matter. And of course, KD, but he wasn't playing in this series. And even with the poor spacing, Curry was able to kill the Portland Trailblazers. Because great players should be able to figure out any situation. You can still win without good shooters on the court. But I don't blame Lillard for his underperformance as much as most people would like to, not only because he was injured, though I do understand some people discounting that, because for one thing, Curry was criticized for the 2016 finals despite being injured, and two, releasing the report of his injury after losing in a terrible performance really makes it sound like you're trying to make excuses. Even if it's true, maybe just let that be known beforehand, because it's just a bad look. But I don't blame him all that much, and I'm also not going to praise CJ all that much because of the Warriors' defensive strategies. Because it seemed pretty clear to me that the Warriors' defensive strategy was to leave guys like Aminu and Harkless wide open, while attacking Damian Lillard and letting CJ McCollum go at it himself. They were putting their better defenders on Dame and giving him more attention offensively, even after CJ started giving them buckets. I think they went with the game plan of, look man, CJ is not going to beat us by himself, so let's leave their poor shooters wide open and we're going to swarm Damian Lillard, who is the only guy that can really beat us. And hey, that game plan worked out for them. But I bet they didn't expect Meyers Leonard to turn into MJ and LeBron combined in Game 4. Basically, the Blazers need more spacing while maintaining their defense. Unfortunately, that is easier said than done because this team is in a really tough cap situation. The Blazers have $126 million already dedicated to this team for next season. The highest a team can go into the luxury tax is $132 million. So they can pretty much bring in a dude on a mid-level exception, unless they can make some trades, which again is easier said than done. The team has some really bad contracts, the main really bad one being Evan Turner's contract. They signed him back in 2016 when every mediocre player was getting signed for like $700 billion a year. But I think that they could get out of that contract the same way that they got out of the Allen Crabbe contract. Another brilliant signing by the Blazers front office. They got out of that contract by trading Crabbe along with a first to the Brooklyn Nets. Attaching a first-round pick to a bad contract and sending that to a bad team desperate for picks is usually a good option. I think the Cavs would take a deal like that. And I think if you gave them a 2020 first instead of this year's first, you could pretty much guarantee that that trade goes through. Meyers Leonard is also a bad contract. I understand he was not a god amongst men in Game 4, but rather a god amongst babies, but he's not normally that good, and he's certainly not worth $11 million a year. Harkless I'm okay with keeping because he's at least a really good defensive player, and his lack of shooting can be fine if he's on the bench, and I'd look to move Aminu. I'm not sure how you move Leonard and Aminu's contract unless you're trading another first-round pick, which if KD ends up leaving Golden State, I think might actually be worth it. So if they made all those moves happen, they could have like $45 million in cap space. I would use like 18 of that to bring back Rodney Hood and Seth Curry, like 13 of that going to Hood and 5 going to Curry. Then you have like $27 million left to work with. With that, I would sign some guys like Trevor Ariza, Even though I praised them earlier, I think Dwayne Dedmon would be a clear improvement over Enes Kanter because he's a better shooter and defender. Nikola Mirotic at the 4 I think would be great for this team's spacing. Marvin Williams would be even better because he's a far superior defender to Nico. A guy like Thabo Sefolosha off of the bench would be great. Darius Miller, you can bring back Wes Matthews. Those are just some names, and I threw this together. An ideal roster for the Blazers going into the 2019-20 season. Dame with Seth Curry as his backup, McCollum with Hood as his backup, Ariza with Thabo as his backup, Marvin Williams with Mo Harkless as his backup, and Nurkic with Dedmon as his backup. That's as ideal as it gets, and I think it's smarter to sign a bunch of shooters and defenders with that cap space rather than to sign a player like Tobias Harris. So now I want to talk about what's in the thumbnail 11 to 12 minutes in the video, I don't know what it is. If this team doesn't seriously add a bunch of shooting and defense, I don't see them becoming a contender barring some random player breaking out. I don't know how much longer Damian Lillard will be okay with watching his roster consistently fail him. I know he's said over and over that he's committed to the franchise, but years from now that might not be the case. Whether it's the Blazers or Dame making the decision, if they don't make the finals within the next 2 years, I don't expect Damian Lillard to be in a Blazers jersey. I don't 100% know what that trade would look like. I think Dame to the Bulls for Zach LaVine could happen, a Dame to the Celtics move if Kyrie leaves for maybe like Jaylen Brown and some picks. Maybe the Phoenix Suns, some team that has a young foundation that just needs a superstar, maybe the Indiana Pacers. I don't know, but his contract is up in 2021, so you might not even have an opportunity to trade him. All I know for sure is that the Portland Trailblazers need to make some moves. Getting to the Western Conference Finals this year was a good sign, but it's going to take a lot of improvement to make it over the top. Or else, it could be time for Dame time to end in Portland. That's the end of this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe for more NBA content like this, and cue the outro music.